All right, so we're going to have a little intro here to the skeletal system, kind of like we did to histology and tissues, and how to approach studying these features on bones in a way that you're actually learning the material and not just trying to white knuckle memorize it where you don't retain it. So, learning all the names of the bones and then all the features on these bones as well. This is just the names of the bones that we have. All right, that's an overwhelming list. Most of them, however, are used for more than one bone. Some of them are used for two, like the tibia, the shin bone. You've got two of those, one for each leg, right? So that cuts the list in half, basically. We've got 24 pair of ribs, so that's shorten it. 10 phalanges on our fingers, 10 phalanges on our toes. That kind of can shorten it as well. But there is still a whole lot to learn. So how can we make this a task that's not so overwhelming? Well, it's all in understanding what the words mean in the name, what the words mean, and understanding and knowing those directional terms we learned in the first unit. So we're going to learn here how to absorb this material in a way that we understand, and we're not just memorizing, we understand what the words mean, and then they relate to other areas as well and other things as we're learning. So you've probably felt quite a bit like you've been learning a new language, and learning anatomy is basically learning a new language. Actually, it's basically two. You're learning some Greek prefixes and suffixes and root words and some Latin ones as well. So you really are learning a new language. And so you need to approach it that way. You've got to understand the meaning of each word. I give extra credit for flashcards because this is how you can really learn, make use of flashcards. They are very useful. I'm going to put some links also on here that to some directions on how to actually make flashcards more useful than just going through them, because there are some different methods that you can actually use on using flashcards. It's really important to practice because we have a lot of stuff that we have to learn for each exam, and I'm sure you thought that first exam had a lot of stuff on it. Well, this one we've got to learn all the bones and all the features, well, maybe not all of them, but most of the features on the bones. All right, and so this is important. We need to know the features because this serves as landmarks. It's a roadmap for your body. It serves as landmarks for your muscles, where to find to take a heartbeat when you're looking between specific ribs. You've got a certain place that you're going to listen for a certain part of the heartbeat. Okay, and so this is a really important way to approach learning anatomy. So don't freak out too much. You do already know some of these. You know what the skull is, right? This is your skull. You know that. You may know what the mandible is. You know what a rib is. Okay. You may know what a sternum is right here. Humerus, a lot of people know that's the leg. Pelvis, femur. So you already know some of these names here. So don't freak out too much. Tibia, there's another one. So understanding how these words translate can make sense. Sternum means breastbone. Well, it's the bone in between your breast. Humerus means arm. Pelvis means a basin. And look at the shape here of the pelvis. It does kind of have a basin shape to it here, all right? Femur literally means thigh, and tibia means shin bone. So learning what those words mean and the descriptional terms, I should say, of the landmarks, what they mean, really helps it make sense. So what are bone features? Well, these are like landmarks on a map, or like if I was giving you directions. Some people use north, south, east, and west, but some of us don't. We're not good with that. We give directions by using landmarks. We're going to learn the geography of the skull here. That's kind of a shortcut. So supraorbital foramen. If we understand, and I use this example a lot, sometimes I say superior. Superior and supra have the same meaning. Supra means above, all right? So we're looking above something. Well, we're looking above the orbit, okay? So this is telling me to look above. This is telling me to look above the orbit. So I know I'm looking above the eye orbit. foramen is a hole or an opening. And so I'm looking for a hole or an opening above the orbit. And so instead of just trying to white knuckle memorize what that name is, I know what it makes sense. And so when I look for the supraorbital foramen, I can find it because I understand what those terms mean. It's basically a shortcut to learning these features. And these features are landmarks of the geography of our body, and so that we can find other things as well. So this is a topographical map here. Can you look at this map? And now if you know how to read topographical maps, that you probably can, but can you tell where the hill is? Can you find the depression? You can probably find the river, but you probably don't know how to find some of those features until you understand how to use the map. And once you know where those features are, you can find your way. So if you're looking for a hill and you know what these features mean, these lines here getting close together, that means they're a hill, and it'll have the elevation written there. It's kind of blurry, but it'll say how high the hill is. So if you were leaving this river and you wanted to find a hill, you could follow the elevation to find that hill and know kind of where that hill would be. All right, or maybe you were lost and you had the map and you wanted to find a hill where you could see further, and you would be able to find it that way. And so we can apply this to learning the skeletal system. We've got landmarks that help us to orient ourselves. All right, so foramen, fissure, all these words, what do they mean? Am I looking for a ridge or a bump, a projection, a small hole, a large hole? So if I know that a foramen is a hole, then a feature with the term foramen in its name, like the mental foramen, is going to be much easier to find. Okay, and so here I've got circled, I have the mental foramen. All right, and then you can have a fissure, an elongated hole or crack, and my picture is probably blocking that out, but this says superior orbital fissure. So superior orbital fissure is going to be a longer shaped hole. And it's kind of hard to see, but the superior orbital fissure is there. It's in the orbit. It is the one above, okay, and it is a longer shaped hole or crevice-like feature. That makes them much easier to find, because then I can narrow it down. Look at all the structures on the inside of the eye there. Okay, there's lots of structures in there, and so you want to know what you are looking for. You can narrow it down to the holes or ridges and other features, or the terrain, so to speak. So if you understand that a condyle is a knuckle-like rounded bump that actually fits into a joint, that really narrows it down and makes it much, much easier to find. So then you can find the mandibular condyle, because the mandibular condyle tells you it is on the mandible, and the fact that it is a condyle tells you it is a rounded knuckle-like bump. And so that makes it really easy to figure out which of these two features on the end of the mandible is the condyle. Well, it's going to be the more rounded-like one. A ramus, I skipped ahead. A meatus is a tube-like opening. All right, so meatus is a tube-like opening. So up here we have the external auditory meatus. External meaning outside, and I bet you can guess what auditory means. It has to do with hearing. So the external opening, tube-like opening, that is related to hearing. So that's going to tell you right away it's in your ear. And then we have an internal acoustic meatus, which would be the opening on the inside. All right. And so this really help you to narrow things down and know exactly what you're looking for. And then we have ramus. Ramus is a branching curve like a ram's horn. And so here you can see you have the ramus on the mandible. It describes the shape and tells you basically what you're looking for. We also have some features that are borders or boundaries on the sides of a bone, basically. So it's a straight edge or a boundary. You can see we have a medial border. So medial means what? To the midline of the body, or middle. And so you can see here, this would be the medial border. And then we also have a lateral border, and this is the scapula or your shoulder blade. All right. So lateral would be the border that goes to the outside. Okay. Another feature or description we can have is a margin, and that's basically the edge of a flat area or bone. And that one really makes good sense, the margins around the eye orbit. All right, so the angle would be an inside or outside corner, which makes sense. It forms an angle. This forms an angle, right? That's the angle of the mandible. Next, we have a notch, which is another one that makes really good sense. It's a V-ish or V-like cut out of the margin or edge of a flat area. So here we can see we have the mandibular notch, and it has that V-ish shape to it. The body of a bone will always be the main or central portion of that bone. So this will be used to describe many, many bones. So here we have the body of the femur is going to be the main portion here of the femur. You can also have the body of the mandible here, and so you get the main portion of the mandible. So body and or shaft. The head is going to be the end piece on a long bone. It's separate from the shaft or the body by a narrowed portion or neck. Next, we have a neck. The neck is the narrowed portion of a bone, usually at the base of the head. So the neck is going to be coming down here. We can split this up to an anatomical neck and a surgical neck. So we're looking at the humerus here, which is the long bone of the arm, and it has an anatomical neck where the head joins the body of the bone, and a surgical neck here where it narrows below that area. And this is often where fractures occur. We mentioned this before, but it deserves mentioning again. Ramus is a portion, curved portion of the bone or branch. And so here we have the mandibular ramus. A facet is a flat surface that forms a joint with another facet or flat bone, and it literally means little face. And so we see these on the vertebrae here. So it's this little flat portion. It's almost, this one's almost a little sunken in, and then this flattened portion where we can have some articulation, which means some movement between the bones. A facet is a depression, and that's often going to be a depression that receives an articulating bone. It even means ditch, and you can see this fossa in here. You can see how that goes in. So we have the olecranon fossa. So look there again, you can see how it's an indentation going in. All right, so the sulcus, a sulcus is an elongated depression or groove. It does mean trench, and so it's harder to see here, but you have an impression here or a groove for the sulcus there. We would call that a sulcus. A larger ridge is, or a moderately middle ridge, raised ridge, is going to be a crest. So here we have the iliac crest. It is often a site for muscles to attach, and a crest means tuft or comb. And so this is highlighted really nicely here in red, the crest, and that is the iliac crest, which is what we would consider our hip bone. All right, so next we have a line, which is similar to a crest, but it's not quite as raised. So this can be much more faint. Sometimes this is something we really kind of have to feel in class. I'm going to look into maybe opening up some times for you to be able to come in the lab if you want to get your hands on the skeleton and actually practice some of these things. It's not going to be required because with the COVID situation, we did go ahead and put Lab Fully online, which is not the best thing to do, but it's what we kind of needed to do so that we could ensure that you guys could get your course. But I'm going to try, if I can fit it in my schedule, and do it in a safe manner to allow those of you that want to come in and do some hands-on practice to do so. I might be working in the background while you're in there, but I would be in the lab with you. So anyway, this can be faint, and you have the linea aspera right here, okay? And so this is on the femur, and you can kind of just feel that raised ridge in the back of that. You can also see some over here on the skull. There is a temporal line of the frontal bone, and that's almost in a curve. So it's really going to. So a process is any projection or significantly raised area, and it's usually something coming off of the bone. And so you can see here we have a mastoid process. okay? And so that's coming out off of the bone. Let me erase that so you can see behind there is the styloid process, and it's almost like a little hook shaped like that coming off of the bone. And then the zygomatic process. And when we look at this sphenoid bone, you can see that this portion of the bone sticks way out. So a process is usually something that's really pointing out. A spine is very similar to a process. It is a little sharper, more pointed, a little bit larger generally in some ways. So sometimes we can say something like we have the spinuous process. And so we're kind of putting those two together. So on your vertebrae, you have spinuous process, and this is going to be the process that you kind of see if you feel your backbone, that's what you're feeling, okay? So it's similar to a crest, but a little bit more raised, okay? And this actually means spine, and looking at these, you can kind of see where those look like thorns or thorns coming out, or a spine like this along in here. And here's another process, the coracoid process sticking out, okay? So spine is going to be a little more elongated and a bit larger generally than a process. A condyle is a rounded bump. This is a really good example. The name literally means knuckle, and so you can kind of see that knucklish appearance right there. This usually fits into the fossa, remember, which is a depression on another bone to form a joint. All right, and so here we've got the medial condyle of the femur because this is going to be towards the midline of the body. The lateral condyle of the femur will be on the outside of the body, towards the outside. Next, we have the epicondyle. Epi means above. So an epicondyle is a bump that is going to be near a condyle. All right. This is usually for muscle attachment, not necessarily ligaments here, and it does mean upon a knuckle. And so we have several examples here of these. We have the lateral epicondyle. So here's the condyle here, and so this one is to the side, so it's a lateral epicondyle, but it's kind of a little bit above. We also have the medial condyle here, a medial epicondyle, sorry about that. And so epi meaning above, condyle, that rounded bump. A trochanter is a much larger, it's not so much of a projection, but bump than an epicondyle. It's for muscle attachment, and it means runner. And so we can have greater trochanters like this one right here. Greater means the larger one, and then a lesser trochanter, and of course lesser is going to be the smaller one. Tuberosities are going to be longer, more oblong shaped, going to be a raised bump. Sometimes we call a small tuberosity a tubercle. These are for muscle attachment, and they can mean bump or lump. So here you can see we have the lesser tubercle, which means the smaller one, and the larger one will be the greater tubercle. All right, you can see these over here, the lesser tuberosity over here, and this would be the greater on this side. You just can't really see it. So we have lots of different sizes of foramen, foramina. We have lots of small ones here, and we have a really large one here. We have the greater foramen. You have the foramen magnum here. Sorry about that. Foramen mollicerum, foramen ovale, spinosum, rotundum. And so foramen is basically a hole, usually a more rounded shape. If it's going to be called a fissure or something else, if it is going to be more elongated shaped. So Addison, and we've talked about this one, this is just a little more detail. It literally means passage. So this is like a foramen, but it is more tube-like. It's more elongated, a long passage through a bone, almost kind of like a canal, like a passageway, a cave through, or a tunnel. That's a better word. A tunnel going through a mountain. That's kind of what a meatus is. So fissure is going to be more elongated and more crack-like. It's basically a split in the bone. And so you can see here we have the inferior orbital fissure there, and above that one would be the superior orbital fissure. And so fissure is going to be more of a crack. This allows blood and vessels and nerves to pass through. A sinus is going to be a cavity or a hollow space within a bone. I have a pet peeve when people say, oh, I have sinuses. I just want to say, Good Lord, I hope you do, honey, because if you don't, you have something wrong. Sinus is just the opening. We have sinus infections, or we can have irritated sinus. So sound properly educated. If you have a cold and you have a sinus infection, then use proper terminology. Really, it's okay. But so sinus is a cavity or an opening, a hollow space in the bone. And so they've had to remove the front part of this bone here for you to be able to see that sinus or hollow space. So I've given you guys a couple tools here to help you learn these names and meanings, and so that you can go through this process and really understand what's going on. And so there's two here. One is bone marking types, and that's basically what we've been covering here. It's what does meatus mean? What does foramen mean? And then you have this one that's skeletal structure names, and that's going to give you the actual interpretation of the bone and sometimes the bone feature. And that can be like 5 or 6 pages long. You don't need to memorize all of those, but you need to learn the ones that are applicable to what we are studying. All right. So for extra credit in this unit, I want you to use those terms. And this is optional. You don't have to do this, but this is going to help you learn them so much better. Drawing an anatomy, first off, is tremendously helpful. Okay. I don't expect you to be an artist, but if you draw a representation of what that bone looks like, it's going to help you remember it much more. So here's the temporal bone, and I actually think I said sphenoid bone earlier in the presentation. Sorry, the sphenoid's on the other side of the temporal. This is the temporal bone. When we were talking about the zygomatic process, I did that, so I apologize. And so I have drawn just the temporal bone there, all right? And so you would put this on one side of your card, and there's explicit directions on this on Blackboard. I'm just going to kind of explain it because I find students don't quite always understand what I mean. So if I explain it and then you read it, it'll make more sense. So draw the bone the best you can, okay? And for these, you have to draw. I think actually on this one I say you can print the bone shapes out, but you're better off drawing. Histology you have to draw, and muscles you have to draw, okay? Maybe it's muscles that I said you can print out. Anyway, the directions are on Blackboard. You're better off drawing, all right? And then labeling all these features. So here is the styloid process on there, the zygomatic process, the mastoid process, okay? And so those are all labeled on the bone. And then on the flip side of that card, I want you to use those two resources that I just showed you to write what these words mean. So a mastoid, well, temporal bone itself just means bone temple of head, okay? Mastoid process is breast-like projection. Stellomastoid foramen, whole, and it says that's an at sign like this, at, you can say between, because it is between the styloid process and the mastoid process. And so that is the minimum that I would like you to have on these cards, because I want you to look up these meanings. If it was me, I would also put things like the temporal bone joins the zygomatic bone, or it's below the parietal bone, other descriptive features to help you identify this. And then you can use these flashcards to study with. And like I said, I'm going to send over, or I'm going to put in the resources, some websites that give you tips on how to use those cards in a way that is most efficient. Okay, the most important thing is to have spaced repetition, which means spacing out practice sessions repeatedly over and over again over a long period of time, because then you're putting it into long-term memory. You're taking advantage of your neural anatomy. You can actually lay down new neural pathways in your brain by revisiting this over and over again. And so then when you need to recall it, you'll have more avenues to get there. You put it in your long-term memory instead of short-term memory. If you cram all the night before, how much do you remember after that? Not much, right? Because you're putting it in short-term memory. And you need this information to go into long-term memory. One, because we build upon this for both semesters of anatomy, and two, because this is going to be most likely part of your job, and you need to know this information so that you can adequately communicate with other medical professionals. All right. So this is the intro. I know that was kind of long, but I hope that you find it really helpful.